Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a very, very special edition of BVTV. It's great to have you all with us today. For on this day, 25 years ago, June 24th, 1979, Breckenridge Village was dedicated. And it heralded in an event that had been planned for many, many years. And that planning began probably back in the 60s, and we're going to talk about that in detail here. And I'd like to introduce some very, very special guests who have returned 25 years later to talk a little bit about the organization, the activities, the hopes, the dreams, the vision, and the mission of the organization. To my immediate left is Reverend Hank Anderson, Pastor Emeritus of Fairmount Presbyterian Church. Hank, it's wonderful to have you and Mary back to visit.
Thanks, David. I'm really looking forward to this.
Great. And Carl Brew. Carl Brew served on the board of Breckenridge Village, has a history back to the very, very earliest days of Breckenridge Village. Carl and Jenny Brew are now residents of Breckenridge, and Carl has served on the local board, on the OPRS board, and has been such an active individual. Next to him is Reverend Bill Gross, Pastor Emeritus of First Presbyterian Church of Willoughby, and Bill served First Presbyterian Church for almost a half a century, and has been such a vital link to the city of Willoughby. For Bill has been active with every major organization in Willoughby, including the hospital, the YMCA, and Breckenridge Village, and all of the work and activity at First Presbyterian Church. Bill, it's wonderful to have you here. And seated to Bill's left is Stephen Menner, and Steve is the retired president of Cleveland Foundation, the second largest and oldest community foundation in the United States. Stephen has a very, very unique and special history with the organization, and we'll talk about that. Currently, he is serving as the executive in residence at Cleveland State University. And Stephen, thank you very much for joining us and spending more time with us again on talking about Breckenridge. One of the things that I wanted to ask this group was to just have each of them give a little bit of reflection about their early involvement with the organization and a little bit about when that started and some of those activities. And I think maybe, Stephen, we'll start with you and Carl. And Stephen, if you would kind of start with some of your original work. And Bill, if you'd pass him the microphone.
Well, my introduction to all of this occurred in 1968 and 1969. As a member of the Glenville United Presbyterian Church, I was active in the Senate of Ohio's Department of Evangelism and Social Witness. And one of the things that Carl and I got asked to do was to be on a task force of ministry to the aging in the Senate of Ohio. And that gave us the opportunity to analyze the needs and problems of aging in Ohio and to recommend some ways in which we could serve and minister to them and to specifically work with the Ohio Presbyterian homes. And it was out of that task force that emerged a report that ultimately in 1969 was adopted unanimously by the Synod that laid out some very different future directions, recognizing that the number of older persons were going to continue to grow. We weren't quite as prescient as, we didn't figure out quite as well as it has happened, and that a number of persons would need residential help. We had to move away from just nursing homes, so to speak.
Great. Carl, do you want to give a few recollections?
The vision of that was Steve and his committee, because I think OPH at that time was willing to coast along on the path on which they were going successfully, but not looking to the future. And I think that look to the future that Steve injected into that committee was extremely vital. And I remember in particular one piece of the conversation when it was said out loud that the purpose of this particular Presbyterian home at Breckenridge should be to see how far down the economic scale it could go without going busted. And that was a new concept of how you probably had to deal with the future. because there were going to be people of all classes and all types requiring this kind of assistance, and you either provided it or you ran a for-profit on Millionaires Row, and that, to me, is a disgrace to society. So Minter's committee really pointed this in the direction that it had to go, and when we have now moved out here and seen that implemented and live among it and see the magnificent group of people, all of whom accept you without question, it's a marvelous experience. And that vision of 30 years ago, 40 years ago paid off.
I have a copy of that original report, and it was entitled Creative Aging and the Church's Ministry of Service, and it was a report of the Task Force on Ministry with the Aging, Synod of Ohio, United Presbyterian Church, and it was presented to the Mission Committee and the Ohio Synod on December 5th and 6th, 1969 in Columbus, Ohio. And I'd just like to read a couple of portions of it, because I think it is, and to encapsulate some of that, is that the organization should serve as developers of low-income housing programs for the aging. And over half of our residents that are receiving services on the campus are primarily modest or low income. The second thing is establish rehabilitation centers with government-funded programs for temporary care, long-term care, nursing care, and terminal nursing care. And one of the things on our campus is that all of the levels of services basically touch different aspects and lives of the individuals. The third is leasing the facility to other organizations, reaching other organizations, minority groups, and the poor, of becoming examples to other institutions in society. And I think to some extent, if there's one aspect that we probably have not yet fully evolved yet, is that one component. And yet, I have had so many organizations come to this campus to look at examples for how Breckenridge not only started to serve a broad socioeconomic background, but also how we reached out in community services. And then the last point was establishing outpatient geriatric centers and/or multiple service facilities for the aging so that people can be reached with quality services in their own homes. And today, on this campus, through the grants of the Cleveland Foundation and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation that were in action the years that I remember, we now touch about 2,000 lives annually through our senior independence, sliding fee scale, transportation, adult daycare centers, case management. And from that, Nancy King, who was our director of community services here, has taken that to OPRS. And now in 25 counties throughout the state of Ohio, we touch the lives of about 20,000 older adults through all of those services. And so that report, Steve and Carl, I think one of the things that we're proud of is that it was very far-reaching in its thoughts and its directions, and that somehow we've been able to kind of take that torch and pass it along and pass it along. So I thank you very much for that thought and that direction. Bill, you were active from the very, very beginnings. What are some of your thoughts about some of the early days with activities here with Breckenridge Village?
Oh, it's been a lot of pleasure. I suppose I should say it's been a lot of fun. Because to challenge people who were running what had proved to be a successful venture and to try to get it expanded and changed was a real challenge. I remember when we told the board at Columbus that our first aim was to make sure that we had all income groups being serviced. And they shook their heads and they said, Bill, you cannot put welfare people and millionaires on the same piece of ground. And I said, we do it every Sunday. And that since we're serving the people of the church, we want to serve all income groups of the church. And they were worried about it, really, because up to that time, I don't think any retirement center accepted people who didn't have a heavy down payment to come in to help finance things. But we persuaded them that there are a lot of civil servants, teachers, nurses, preachers, who might not have enough money to put a big down payment, but would have enough money if they could keep their funds to finance them in a slightly higher rent apartment. And they were willing to finally try. And now I think they're glad they did.
Absolutely.
The only one thing that they really objected to and dragged their feet on was when we said we wanted to have a child care center too. They said, that is not our business. I said, it might not be our business, but it will be a good investment because it will mean you won't have to continue to train so many people, because people who have children to come to them with work and to see their children during the day when they're working, this will help stabilize our workforce. So we're glad we have a good children's service.
And I too concur with all of those thoughts, Bill, because I look at the turnover in retirement communities of employees, and we are about 75% lower than the average turnover of long-term care facilities. And the thing that I've often commented about is that there's kind of a familial relationship, I think, with the residents and the staff. It is genuine and it's heartfelt. And the second thing is that everyone really does love the kids, and they're a great addition.
Yeah, I'd like to emphasize the fact these buildings are terrific and they look nice, but they're successful not because they're well constructed and have a nice appearance, because they're filled with a staff that is caring and really act like they're glad they're working here. And the residents are just so pleased by every touch, from those who clean our rooms, to those who serve at our tables, those who make repairs, those who check our bills. They're all such wonderful people. And I don't know how an administrator could ever bring that many people together, but I hope he finds out how to keep them now that he's got them.
Thanks, Bill. With me is Reverend Hank Anderson, and Reverend Anderson was with Fairmount Presbyterian Church, and Fairmount Presbyterian Church too had a very special relationship. And he and wife Mary have traveled down from Minnesota to spend some time with us, and we thank you very much for that. And Reverend Anderson, I wondered if you'd give a few thoughts about some of those years that were probably in the latter 70s, shortly after Breckenridge opened up, and some of that work. And Carl, if you'd hand the microphone, that'd be wonderful.
Well, David, I'm very pleased to be here. And I'm grateful that the four of you spoke before I did, because you were the foundations of this, and I came in some years, in 1974 to be exact, so it was about 6 years after it was started by the Synod.
That's all right, we need a good closer.
Yes, we do.
Well, I mean, to hear what the foundation of it, David, through your insights, and then Steve's with the emphasis that the Synod has provided for this work, and then to have Carl Brew, my dear friend from Fairmount Church, speak of his insights, and then Bill Gross, who was a dear friend also, as well as Steve, who was also a member of Fairmount Church, speak of the theological emphasis that I think Bill and I and all four of us here, and you too as well, share. And I think it's the theology and the emphasis of theology that I would like to begin with. My theology tells me that God always prepares the way. And what you and Steve and Bill and Carl discovered was that the way was already there. You had to just keep talking and following what was your instincts in terms of what you wanted. And I'm particularly proud and pleased that we have a strong social consciousness in terms of social justice issues here. And everything about I've heard this attracts me to it. And I would like to tell you a couple of things that illustrate for my part of it as to how this same kind of strategy was fulfilled. Shortly after I arrived at Fairmont Church in 1974, one of the saints of the church, along with these saints, Bill, the person was Ken Schaefer.
Yes.
And he had retired as the associate pastor at Covenant Church and lived just a short distance from Fairmont Church, which was up the hill from Covenant. And he was on our staff as a visiting pastor. Very gentle, wonderful soul. So one day, shortly after I came in, he said, Hank, I think I ought to tell you this as you start your ministry, that there's something very dear to my heart and something that I think you could help us with. And I said, well, what is it, Ken? And he said, well, some years ago when I was down at Covenant Church, I talked with a fellow, and this fellow gave us some land out near Breckenridge Village. And we've been wondering how to develop that land. And I was thinking that you might be an instrument in this. And I said, well, that's a nice way of putting it, Ken. And I said, basically, what you probably want is money. and he said, well, yes, as a matter of fact, that's exactly what I came in to talk about. Well, I said, Fairmont Church is the Lord's servant, and we're here to serve. And I think Fairmont Church should be a part of this, and I want it to be, and I will do whatever I can to engage Fairmont Church in this ministry. Well, shortly after that, someone called and made an appointment, and he was a fund developer for Breckenridge Village. And he came in, and I don't know whether we were for directly for Breckenridge Village or for the Synod, but I think it was both. And he came in and he said, Hank, I know you're new here, and but we have to get going. And Ken Schaefer spoke to me and said it would be all right for me to come up and talk. And he said, basically what I'd like to find from you is that we need $1 million to get started. We need $1 million. And I said, well, that seems like a reasonable amount from Fairmont Church. Sure, we'll do it. And that was about all the conversation. Then I got to think about how in the world, I don't know these parishioners, and I've just been new here, and this has dropped on my lap. And I thought, well, I'd heard of a parishioner, Alan Austin, who was a wealthy contractor, member of our church. He had made big bucks during World War II building big, what is the company today?
Halliburton.
Halliburton, like Halliburton. And he had come out of that with a lot of money. And his personal attorney lived next door to the Fairmont Church in a great big English Tudor manse. And his mother was there now, and he talked to Alan Austin and said, Alan, you could get some write-off if you bought that building next to the church and then gave it to the church as a manse. He said you could get quite a nice write-off. And so Alan, always looking for write-offs, as anyone does with money, bought the manse, and it's still there as a manse. It's a beautiful English Tudor home. So I knew he had done that, and I thought, well, he would be a good man to go and start talking. So I went out to him immediately and made an appointment, and I said, I want to come out and thank you, Mr. Austin, for making that manse possible for us. And now, maybe, I don't know whether you've heard of Breckenridge Village or not, but I'm new here, and they came in and said that they would like $1 million from the Fairmont Church. And frankly, I thought, I came out here for your advice. I wanted to ask you if you would tell me how I ought to go about raising this $1 million. And he said, that's the best approach to getting money I've ever heard, Hank. And he says, I never had anyone ask for money the way you're just asking for it. And I said, well, I really wasn't thinking about you directly, but I knew that you were generous, and I wanted you to give me a scheme. And he said, well, let me think about it. And I don't think he needed to think about it, but he gave it. That was it right then. Then from his yacht, he was on a private yacht out in the Caribbean, and he called me and said, will you be preaching next Sunday? And I said, yes. And he said, well, we'll be in there, and I'd like to talk to you about your idea. And I said, oh, fine. I hadn't had a call from a yacht ever in my life, and, and I knew that he meant what he was talking about. So he actually came to my office, and he said, well, Henry, he said, I've got a scheme. He said, how we can raise this $1 million. And he said, we need to do it quickly. And he said, my idea is that I can give you the names of 10 people that we exchange this sort of thing all the time. Mm-hmm. I'll give you the names of 10 people, and they will raise $750,000, giving $75,000 apiece, 10 of them. That's $750,000. Mm-hmm. And if you get the 10 to do this, then I will give you $250,000, making your $1 million.
Wow.
And so I said, well, that seemed like a good proposition. And I took their names and address, and some of them were members of Fairmont Church, but most of them were not. But I found that they were amenable to this because they wanted to have Alan Austin give $250,000. They were only giving $75,000, and that appealed to them. And so toward the last, and Alan had made one other stipulation. He said it has to be done quickly, and I'll give you 3 to 4 weeks. But on my birthday, my 75th birthday, you have to have that, or you don't get my $250,000. I said, that's fair enough. And
At least he gave you the names.
Yes, yes.
And so toward the last, I had about 4 of them, and I still had about the rest to go. And so 4 others gathered in my study and called long distance to Hawaii, to the Caribbean islands. And over the phone, I heard their conversation, and they raised the remaining $75,000. And they said, and every one of them said, Alan Austin will give $250 if you will give $75. Mm-hmm. And so that's how it was done. When they left the office that day, they had raised $750,000, and I had all their names with the attached to it. And so Alan Austin's birthday was the next day, and I got a fancy birthday card, and I said, dear Alan, happy birthday. You owe me $250,000, and put it on the card. And then I said, the following have given $75,000 apiece. And he said, and there was a big celebration in his lovely home, and I just put it in among the cards. The next day he called me and said, that's the damnedest birthday card I ever got. And he said, you're on. And he said, now let's talk about some other things too. So then he came out and talked with me, and he said, you know, I'd like to build this place. And he said, I'm willing to give a cost plus. In other words, I will do, but it'll be a further gift of mine to build the health center. And that's how it all started. And then from then on, I talked to Alan Austin and again about this, and Art Schweitzer. I began to get in on the team that Steve and Bill and Carl represented.
Yeah. Oh, what a wonderful, wonderful story.
It's a great story.
And as many of the residents know, the Fairmont Health Center opened up in 1981. And that is our licensed healthcare facility. And it has served so many people through the years. And I think a very caring and compassionate way, and I'm so pleased to know that that wonderful story carries through not only today but well into the future. And then the Austin Room at the Osborne Community Plaza is named in memory and honor of Alan Austin.
Great.
And so his name kind of carries on. I wonder too, Steve, if we could kind of start with you, that there are a few other individuals that you may remember working with, or some other names I think one of the things that I was telling Hank Anderson before we started was that one of the things that always amazed me was that everyone that I've worked with through the years came to Breckenridge Village pure of heart in service. And I have met so many wonderful, wonderful people that carried a candle and lit another candle, and that candle became a torch, and it just has continued to pass. But I look at so many people that were part of that spirit. And Stephen, I wondered if you might recall.
I'm a blank right now.
Are you?
Candidly.
Can you tell me a little bit about Gene Owen and Bud Owen and the Schweitzers,
Well,
perhaps?
there's the
Yeah,
people
okay.
far better to tell you than
Really?
myself.
Okay.
Well, I find that the relationship with people is, as you would use the same language, I think, is a loving relationship. And I go into the encounter with people knowing that God has already prepared the way. And I have to feel strongly that these are people that I'm talking about are servants of God, and they want to respond. They want to respond. So when I called on Art Schweitzer, he was I've forgotten now, he was an executive at
TRW.
yeah,
TRW. Yeah.
TRW. And the president at that time was also a member of our church. And Art Schweitzer said, Hank, here are some names I'd like you to talk to. And he was an enterprising person who just lacked no amount of energy and openness, and he was very gracious. As you talk about carrying the torch, he was really a live torch. And Betty, who also participates, Betty Schweitzer, and still does, is they sparkle with that fire. Yes. And I am impressed with the fact that theology that I've experienced is evidenced in the lives of the people who demonstrate the very sort of thing you were talking about, David, that God's Spirit is among us, and all we have to do is just to be a part of that Spirit, go expecting things, and then attempting great things for God, and it's just unfolded. And I see this as one of the a way of completing a ministry that I had of 40 years, is seeing this flower give bloom to what it is today, primarily because of committed people.
Yes.
David, I might just say,
sure.
In this experience, I can remember meeting with Hank and Carl and about this, and Carl talking. That's the first time I really learned about the Brew Clan. There was a big organizing principle. Yes. Hank had to do it by going and getting 75,000 from 10. Carl had his own scheme as to how he was going to marshal his entire family into doing this, and I think you ought to share that.
Talk a little bit about that, Carl,
Yeah.
if you would.
Well, we were having a family reunion as this place was being built. And so we made that kind of the thing to do when you weren't sitting around eating or drinking, which is what our reunions usually consist of. So we arranged about 8 of us who would transport any willing being of the 300 and some odd that were assembled over to see what was being done over here. And Jerry Osborne had already made his commitment to the community plaza, and as third generation down from Frank and Dolly, that was a magnificent event. And so he was the bait with which we got them all in line to come over and see what was being done by Jerry. And then we decided, after we got a few of them enthusiastic about this, that the lobby needed its own backer. And therefore, why didn't the rest of us peasants in the family back the construction of the lobby? And so that sold, believe it or not, because we were all in the Dolly and Frank spirit when we go back to a family reunion, because that's from whence it all starts. And so we found a whole list of us maybe 100 of them out of the 300 that were there. And of course, a lot of those were children and spouses. But we got about 100 gifts out of those people that paid, I've forgotten how much money, to augment the financing of what Jerry was basically financing. And so there are a lot of people in this family who know that when they walk into the Osborne Community Plaza, they turn to the right and salute the picture of Frank and Dolly Osborne, the grandparents of my generation, that's hanging on the wall over there. And it was an easy thing to do. One other guy that I think was very effective in Breckenridge, but kept it a secret, is Ham Beatty. Ham Beatty was on the committee that was told that two people wanted to give land to Breckenridge way out on Vrooman Road. And so we met with the then director and Ham and a couple of other guys every other Friday for a year or so and talked about that. And Ham Beatty was the key figure in that group because he could sell ideas to you that made it feel like it was yours. And he knew that putting an auxiliary place 20 miles away was ludicrous. And he also knew that there was an impediment to our going all the way through to Euclid Avenue, and he knew how to work on that. But he didn't do it. He fed the rest of us in how to do it so gently that you thought it was your idea. The guy was an absolute genius at forming your opinions, forming your approaches, and keeping himself out of it. The most amazing thing I have ever seen, and that resulted in the agreement with the Board of Education, or however that was done. I never got into that part of it, and let us run all the way through. So now when I am trying to obey the instructions to do the amount of exercise, I can obey your rule of walking from Schaefer-Schweitzer down to BV North and back once a day. Without Ham Beatty, that never would have happened.
Bill, you had some thoughts too.
Yeah, I don't know whether I ever told you, Carl, about how the start of Jerry Osborne's gift.
I know that. I know who did that.
He came over to my office one time, and I had just known Jerry in the community, but not too well. But he had 4 checks with him from different parts of his enterprises, totaling $18,000. And he said he wanted to give them because he was interested in this outreach program we were talking about. So we talked a while, and finally I thanked him and said, I think it was very lovely you come over and bring this initial down payment. And he didn't blink. So I called the fundraiser. I said, can you get a picture of the plaza with the name Osborne on it? And he, 2 days later, came to my office one evening at 8 o'clock in the evening, and it had this beautiful picture, Osborne Plaza. So I called Jerry then on the phone, and I said, Jerry, I have a beautiful picture of this plaza up here for our outreach. I said, and it has the Osborne name on it. And he said, how much would that cost? And I said, well, it's $1 million building. It would cost you about $500,000. And he didn't blink. He said, I'd like to see it. So we went to see him, and he said, you know, I've made all my money in Mentor, but my parents lived in Willoughby. And my grandfather had some interest in a little railroad and mine down in southern Ohio. He said that we've inherited, and he said, I've gotten part of it. Of course, once he got into this thing, it became prosperous again, and they sold it. And he said, I will give you my father and mother's money for Willoughby. So he finally gave us $130,000 more. And after he got that signed up, I said, well, Jerry, I think that is wonderful. but that's your parents' money. When are we going to get some of yours? And he laughed, and I think he got talking with Carl. And then they organized the family picnic to get all the rest of them in. And I think it was Uncle John who was really surprised to give something to somebody. I don't think he had given much away at that time.
No.
But he became interested and he gave some more. So
How wonderful.
your family connections did a whole lot for this, thanks to you and Jerry.
Stephen, can you talk a little bit? You know, we've talked about all these gifts, but from your experience, what gifts mean as far as helping an organization meet its mission and the importance of that? And I feel that it's had such profound impact on this organization.
Well, as you know, I was privileged for almost 30 years to be at the Cleveland Foundation, which was all about trying to help build and promote the quality of life. And happened to be again, as Hank suggests, I really believe the Lord works in very mysterious ways. And lo and behold, who should come and visit me when I was the program officer in social services, but the Breckenridge crowd, to talk about, look what we've accomplished, come see. By the way, you had something to do with that. And now we're in a position to really begin to do outreach. And we really want to follow through on that. And in the beginning, we said, well, gee, this is not in Cleveland. But on the other hand, it was serving residents of Northeast Ohio and Ohio. And I think when we did the examination and very careful study, we were impressed that Breckenridge Village really meant that they were going to serve elderly persons in Northeast Ohio, and particularly to try and focus upon those who were right around them. And when we looked at that and began to understand what was happening in terms of the demographics of Northeast Ohio, and we now know today that this is Cuyahoga County, which is right next door, is the second oldest county in the U.S. outside of Florida, okay? And Allegheny County, Pittsburgh, being the oldest. So the need here was really great, and to have an organization that was committed towards saying it's more than about nursing home care and care for the frail elderly, but let's begin to think about residential care, let's begin to think about our outreach to the community, and we want to be an example that others can look to. And that was very important. That's why the Cleveland Foundation helps to support organizations so others will follow. And I'm very much mindful of the fact that when Carl and I were on the task force for Ministry of the Aging, we went on a site visit to Mansfield, Ohio, okay, to see the Mansfield Memorial Homes. And we were able to see something tangible that said, take this vision and go beyond it. And so with Breckenridge, we can point to and have happily endorsed grant requests to Robert Wood Johnson and others to say, come look at what's going on at Breckenridge Village. Look at the outreach. Here's an example of the kind of thing that has to be done. And as you know, I had the privilege to speak at your annual meeting and pointed out that the number of persons 65 years of age or older was 6.5 million in 1935 when they established the Social Security Act. That number had grown to 35 million by the mid-1990s, and in another 30 years will grow double again to 70 million persons. And one of the most extraordinary things is that we've discovered and learned is there are a number of 80-year-olds walking around today who are as active and as well off as 60-year-olds were just a few generations ago. And this is an enormous treasure untapped treasure, perhaps the last great untapped treasure that we have in our country in terms of utilizing the skills and talents. And so who's going to lead that charge? I think organizations like Breckenridge can be at the forefront and have been.
Thank you. We're just about out of time, but I wondered if we'd kind of just go and give some final thoughts and hopes for the future, and I would very much appreciate that. Do you want to start, Hank?
I appreciate very much hearing from the four of you about this, and it reinforces my own theology. I've always liked to have themes sticking out there as a sign, and one of them has been William Carey, who said, "Attempt great things for God, expect great things from God." And that's been a terrific, it's been terrifically demonstrated here. The three here and you have attempted great things for God because you expected great things from God. And life is found in God, in whom we live and move and have our being, and we have given testimony to the way in which we can find life together as fully as we are finding it here through an institution like Breckenridge Village.
Thanks so very much.
I think one of the things that has caught my attention all the time out here is the quality of the people that work here. And every one of them says, there's nothing special about me. I don't have some monumental education. I just have a job I love. And they have all loved it for untold years, some of them even since the founding of this place. Now that's a rare thing in the world today, because when I saw people who didn't work here, but worked in things around here, there was not that attitude at all. So the way these people feel about working here and the amount of time and dedication and love of job that they demonstrate, in my entire experience, is absolutely astounding. And even the child care center over here, the Claps gift, these people say, I don't have to worry about my child. I work here. I can go see the child whenever it's convenient. I can be totally assured. Things like that, it seems to me, make this thing click just all the much better. It's magnificent.
I'd like to mention one name that hasn't been named yet, and that's Tom Maston, because the fundraisers that we had to do a survey about how much we could raise and how we'd go about it. They came out one day and they said, well, we have two things that we're worried about. One is, we don't think you can raise more than $2 million. I said, well, that's all right, don't worry about it, because we're going to raise 3. I said, if that's what we have to have, that's what God will lead us to do. They said the other thing is that everybody in Cleveland says this is a Lake County project. Better get someone from Lake County to head it up. And everybody in Lake County says, well, we don't know that we have anyone who can do it, because the person that we think should do it probably won't. They said, and they named the same person that the Cleveland people did. They said Tom Maston at Lubrizol. And I said, well, Tom won't ask anyone for money, and that's a good thing, because he'd never get any. I said, but however, Tom is acquainted with all the people in Northeast Ohio, and I think he can help us put together the team that we need. So they said, yes, but then you can't reach Tom. I said, well, yes, you can. They said, how? I said, well, you call him up. And they said, do you know him that well? And I said, well, he knows a lot of people. So I said, when do you want to see him? They said, as soon as possible. So I called Lubrizol and asked to speak to Dr. Maston. He got on the phone and he said, Bill, what do you want? And I said, that's not the question. The question is, do you want to go to heaven? And he said, what's this about? I said, Tom, we need your help to put together a team of people to raise money for our Breckenridge project that I've been talking about. And he says, well, he says, I know most of them who ought to be capable of it. I said, well, we'd like to talk to you about getting the names. And he said, well, when do you want to see me? I said, how about now? And he said, well, come on down. So we went down, we went in. He said, what you're looking for is the powerhouse of Northeast Ohio. And I said, yeah. He said, well, I got it right here in my desk. And he pulled out 2 folders, ring binders, and he went through the names. This person only gives the Catholic things. This person only gives the education. This person only gives the nature study. And then he said, this person's got a lot of money, and he gives a lot of things. Anyway, he said, how many names do you need? And I said, well, I'd like to have about 150 if we can. So we went through, and he got 150 names for us. I said, now, we'd like to invite these down to the Union Club, and we'll write the letter. All you have to do is sign it and pay for the bills. We'd like to invite them down there in groups of 20 and talk about what our project is and see how many will be interested in working. And he said, well, that's easy. I said, well, thank you then. So we went through that project, but we asked, who do you think ought to be the chairman? And he named Al Schweitzer. He thought that he would be a real good fellow because he had done a lot of good things in the Cleveland area and was capable. If he said he'd do something, it would be done. Well, then you know the unhappy thing was 6 weeks later, when Al died.
Yeah.
And we went back to Tom. He said, well, I know why you're here, because of Schweitzer's death. He said, I've been thinking about it. And he says, I don't know. And he said, there's a fellow across the hall. He said he might be a good person. So we went across the hall, and he brought back one of the retirees from New Brazil, who is now the secretary of their foundation. And he introduced him to us and explained what we would like to have him do. And he said, I think that would be fun. And so we got the new chairman, who happened to be a good Roman Catholic, who went to Mass every morning. So we started out as a fine ecumenical project. And we have the dining room in Schaefer Schweitzer named for him.
Dr. Michael O'Connor.
And when he was remarried on the St. Patrick's Day, he and his wife decided that they would celebrate St. Patrick's Day with a breakfast for Breckenridge people. And we continue that every St. Patrick's Day. We have a pancakes breakfast, and the safety forces and other employees from the city join with our staff here and serve the residents to a happy St. Patrick's Day.
And we
event.
tip our hat to Dr. Michael and Jerry O'Connor every St. Patty's Day,
Yes,
our
sir.
longest standing tradition.
I can add to that story. Tom Maston was on the distribution committee of the Cleveland Foundation and was someone who didn't have a time about all the material we sent him. And so he didn't call very often. But he did call me and say, I noticed going through the docket that there's this grant request on there from Breckenridge Village. I just want to let you know that I'm very interested in that. And is it all right if I call Stan Pace? So I said, of course. And so you had Stu Harrison and Stan Pace on the distribution committee who were members of Fairmont Church. And so all of that just goes around. And Mr. Maston, because he didn't have time to read, at one point even proposed that he would like his executive assistant, I forgot the woman's name, to come to our committee meeting so she could sit in. And we said, no, you can't really do that. But she would read all of these materials, And not long after he called me, she called me to say, oh, I was looking through the materials and I saw there was a grant request from Breckenridge Village. You know, Mr. Maston is interested in that. And I said, yes, I did know that. So that's what happens.
I think it's been so wonderful for about the last hour to have remembrances on the beginnings of this organization and everything that has occurred over the last really 35, 40 years, and particularly the last 25 years. My thoughts and sentiments are is that if you want to see the hope and the spark for Breckenridge Village, there is a painting of Reverend Ken Schaefer in the Schaefer House. And if you look into Ken's eyes, I think you see the hope and the vision for what this organization could be. And I remember leaving a board meeting and Ken and I walked out on it was a beautiful, beautiful evening, and we were up by Schaefer Schweitzer House, and North was completed, and the 30 ranches were just finishing. And I said, Ken, did we meet your expectations? And he smiled in that warm, gentle smile, and he says, we've gone so far beyond that. And my hope and prayers for Breckenridge is that it continues for the next 25 years, and that spark just continues as it has for the current 25 years. And I would particularly like to thank these 4 individuals for all that they have done, and the stories that they have shared this morning, I know are so heartfelt and so much appreciated by so many people. And so to all of the board members, all of the staff, all of the volunteers, and all of the residents, all of the clients, I wish you the very, very best for not only this day, but I know that the future will continue along with the spirit that has carried it so far during the current 25 years. So Stephen, thank you so very much for being here. Reverend Bill Gross, Carl Brew, and Reverend Hank Anderson, thank you so very much.